About the accident at lunchtime recess. We were from a very small town of about 2,000 people, and word travels fast. There had been rumors that there had been a couple of explosions at a small rural plant in rural Oklahoma, and we heard the teachers talking about it. Everyone's dad worked for the same company, it seemed like, and a couple of my friends at recess and I were talking, and one of my friends said, my dad works at that company. Maybe my dad was one of the ones that was hurt on the job. And another friend said, my dad works at the company as well, and maybe he was one of the ones hurt on the job. And her dad happened to be the supervisor that Tracy didn't want to talk to get the job done right. And I said, my dad works with Tracy. My dad works at the company. Maybe he was the one that was injured. And our teacher heard us talking. He said, girls, I'm sure it was nobody's dad. Don't worry about it. Just go back to playing. So we went back to playing. It was what a fourth grade girl does. For some reason that day, after recess, we were watching the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. To this day, I have never finished that movie. About halfway through, the principal came in. He stuck his head in, asked if he could talk to my teacher. They conversed for just a few minutes in the hall, and when they came back into the room, they were both crying. And neither one of them would look at me. My teacher said, Kayla, you need to get your things together. And I thought, this is not normal. This is not what normally happens to me on a Friday afternoon. I don't get pulled out of school very often, forever. And so I started walking to my desk, and I had this overwhelming feeling that maybe it was something with my dad, something about the explosions that I had heard the teachers talking about. And I asked my teacher, do I need my science book? And he said no. And I thought, well, this is not normal for real, because what teacher doesn't want you to take homework home over the weekend? And so I got my stuff together. I started walking out of the classroom, and the teacher pulled me into a bear hug, and he hugged me very tightly. He said, I love you. I'll be praying for you. And I thought, something serious is going on. Why is he crying? Why is he telling me he loves me, that he's praying for me? This is unusual. I started walking down the hall with the principal, and he very uncharacteristically put his arm around my shoulders. And I thought, okay, something is seriously going on. I just had this sense of foreboding. What is going to happen when I walk out of this room with this principal? We walked down the hall, and as we turned the corner, there happened to be a group of teachers, and they were all huddled together. They were all crying. And when they saw me, they split. Nobody would make eye contact with me. And right in the middle of their group stood my mom's best friend, Connie. And Connie was crying, and she stopped and looked at me and took a big breath, and she said, let's go get your sisters. My sisters were in middle school at the time, in 5th and 7th grade. I was in 4th grade at the elementary school. It was just a couple of blocks apart. We got into Connie's van, and I said, Connie, what's going on? Why are you getting me out of school? And she wouldn't answer. I said, Connie, where are my parents? Where's my dad? Did something happen? And she wouldn't answer me. She just kept her hands at 10 and 2, and tears were streaming down her face. I finally just quit asking questions because I was not getting any answers. We pulled up to the middle school. My sisters got in the car, and Connie turned around to look at us, and she took a big breath, and she said, girls, your dad. And I just lost it. I knew that there had been an explosion because I'd heard my teachers talking about it, and I knew that Connie was pulling me out of school, and now she's telling me my dad something, so I just didn't want her to finish. I thought if she just quit talking, then maybe I would wake up from this horrible nightmare I was in. I said, no, stop talking. Don't talk. Don't say anything else. Stop talking. Be quiet. Don't stop talking. And I just kept screaming it over and over. Stop talking. Don't say anything else. And Connie got me calmed down, and my sisters had not heard anything about the explosion, and so Connie explained a little bit more. Dad had been in an explosion at work, and that my mom was with him, that he was being life-flighted down to Lubbock, Texas, 5 hours south of where we lived. And she said, we're going to go to their house, and to her house. My sister, Sarah, who's always kind of been the more serious of the three of us, looked Connie just straight in the eye, and she said, is he dead? And Connie said, not yet. Not yet. Your dad is not. 3 weeks is a long time for a mama to be without her kids. It's even longer for her kids to be without her. The doctors were willing to bend the rules. We were not quite old enough to go back into the burn intensive care unit, but they loved my mom so much that they were willing to let us go back. We got to go back to see Dad. We had to put on booties and a gown. We had to put on gloves and a mask and a hairnet just to go back and see our dad. And we walked back in. Mom and I went on Dad's right side, and Brandy and Sarah started up on Dad's left side. Sarah took 2 steps into the room, and then she took 2 steps out, and she thought, I don't want to see him. I don't want to remember this guy on the bed. I want to remember the dad that coached my softball team. That's the dad I want to remember. And so she took 2 steps back out of the room, and Brandy and I went ahead and walked up to to see Dad, and of course we were expecting to see this Dad. We were expecting to see maybe he looked like he was sleeping, but instead what we saw was a thing. Still 3 weeks after the accident, he was so swollen from the heat of the fires, you could not tell where his chin ended and his neck began. His lips were massively swollen. If he was not red, he was black. If he was not exposed, then he was wrapped in gauze, and most of that gauze had blood spots still bleeding through 3 weeks after the accident. I would lay in bed at night and my arms would ache. My dad's a very affectionate man. He was always hugging us and loving on us and kissing us. He was always wrestling with us and throwing a softball with us. I would lay in bed at night and my arms would ache. It felt like I'd been lifting weights because I just wanted to touch my dad. I wanted to hug him. And so then when I'm standing next to him on the hospital bed, my mom says to me, "You can touch him, you can hold his hand." And I looked down at his hand and I thought, I don't want to touch him. I have from San Antonio that really sticks out is not long after we got to San Antonio, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard a sound, and because I was the younger one, but I've always been kind of the bigger sister, the taller one, the most physically stout sister of the three of us, I decided I was going to go investigate what that sound was because I needed to protect my sisters because they're weenies and they weren't going to do anything to help our family. But I needed to investigate because there was no one there to protect me. A dad cannot protect his daughter when he's laying in the hospital bed. So now there's a strange sound in the middle of the night, and I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to go investigate it. And as I turned the corner into the living room, I realized that sound wasn't really that strange of a sound. It was the sound of my mom sitting on the couch sobbing. Just gut-wrenching sobs. She had a box of Kleenexes next to her, and she was just going through them, trying to stifle her sob through a wad of Kleenexes. And I didn't want her to know that I was there, so I kind of backed out into the hall, ended up falling asleep, not for the last time, to the sound of my mom crying. Why? I don't know. I never asked her, why were you crying? I can imagine as a wife now, I can imagine that she was crying because of what her husband had put her through. The stress of moving an entire family all the way down 11 hours from where you're from. The stress of finding an apartment, enrolling her girls in strange schools. The stress of finding a new church, of finding new friends. The stress of having her husband in pain, physical pain, but in emotional pain beyond what any of us even knew he was fighting with. I don't know why my mom was crying, but I know what caused it.